My name's John. I'm a senior right now doing major in physics and math.
So each semester, it seems as though for the past several years, I have someone in class who's connected to one of the mass shootings that have happened in the United States. John had written on the volunteer forum that he attended Sandy Hook Elementary School. So you know, Sandy Hook Elementary School was a mass killing that I thought, many of us thought, this was going to be a mass shooting that changed guns in the United States. And that's because 20 children died and 7 adults. For those of you who don't know anything about this, I don't want to be gratuitous, but you need to understand. It was a crime scene. I've been reading some stuff about people who were part of the crime scene who said, it changed their lives forever. Like, you can't even imagine what we're talking about, what it would have been, okay? So the next slide. This is the school. This is Sandy Hook Elementary before they tore it down on just a regular school day. So tell us how you're connected.
So I just want to start this off, I guess, by saying I wasn't there when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I had graduated about a year before that.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, I didn't personally know any of the children, but I knew some of their siblings. I recognized some of the faces, and then some of the staff I did know.
And you went to the school, though?
Yeah.
And you had gone, so it goes up through 4th grade, mm-hmm. and then you went to the 5th and 6th grade school in Newtown. And so you were in school that day, but at a different school?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And so the whole experience is, it's a small community, right? This is not a big city. This is a small community. Can you just say something about it? So we can kind of feel.
Yeah.
But there's just one school for each grade or multiple schools?
Yeah, so there was I think 2 or 3 elementary schools. Mm-hmm. Sandy Hook was one of them. And then the school after that, the 5th, 6th grade, that was Reed Intermediate. And then there's Newtown Middle School, which is 7th and 8th grade, and then the high school.
Mm-hmm. So it's one of these communities, when we think about this, the tragedy of this level, right? It's something that just impacts everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us about that day. Walk through.
So I don't really remember anything specifically from the morning before everything started. But what I do remember is being in, I think my first period PE class.
And you were 9 or 10?
I was, I think, 11.
11, okay.
So we originally went into lockdown, and I remember they said that we were having a lockdown drill. Specifically, they didn't say outright that it was lockdown, but they said it was a code black. And none of us knew what that meant, but I think a lot of the teachers definitely had some sort of idea that something was really wrong was going on, because that's not something that you would normally get during a lockdown drill. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I remember we were in the gym for I think about 4 hours with just no word from anything. So we kind of all knew that there was something going on, but we had no idea what. And I remember near the end of that 4 hours, they said that the lockdown drill was over. We were just doing a hold and secure, which is basically, I think, we could move throughout the school, but no one was allowed in or out. And they said there has been an incident at Sandy Hook. And none of us knew what that was. Yeah, but I remember during that kind of period of time, it was already super surreal almost. It was really no one had any idea what was going on. Just we knew that there was something very weird happening.
And where were your parents?
So I think at this time both of my parents were at work.
Okay.
But yeah, so we were allowed to go back to our classrooms. I remember we went to get lunch and stuff. and I had a handful of friends that had like brothers and sisters that were at Sandy Hook. One of my best friends had 2 sisters that were there. So like I remember like going to lunch and asking the lunch lady like, can I get him like an extra cookie? 'Cause like I know he's like worried about it and stuff. But yeah, so like I remember eventually like after lunch when we went back to the classrooms, there were some rumors that were starting to go around because like I'm not sure if one of the kids had like a phone or access to the internet or if one of the teachers was like saying anything. But like at this time, like I don't even think the media really knew exactly what was going on because like the story was still developing. But I remember hearing that like a gun went off in the school. And I just remember like I'm not even religious, but I was praying that no one got like hurt or injured or anything. And I remember like eventually we were like getting more rumors that like it might have been like 3 or 4 people were injured or something. And I was getting really worried, but still like the whole magnitude of it was not something that I would have ever even imagined.
Yeah.
And like at that point, like I was hoping it was all rumors.
Yeah, right. You couldn't imagine, right? You're 11 years old. Like you can't you're not going to think a slaughter, really. When did you see your parent? The parents must have, when that word got out, parents must have just swarmed.
Yeah, so I remember, like, I'm not sure if it was over the intercom. I think it was, like, the teachers were getting calls on their phones, basically. And it was essentially, like, students were getting called down to the office. And, like, no one had any idea why, but it was just, like, one after another. And I remember eventually my name got called. So I can't remember, like, if I was, like, escorted down the hallway or if I just went. I assume someone probably took me. But I remember getting to the front of the school, and there's, like, this big glass window, and I just saw a crowd of probably, like, 30 or 40 parents outside. And, like, I couldn't really see their faces or really see what was going on because, like, I was kind of far away at that point. But at that point, I was just super confused. Like, I knew there was something wrong. I didn't know, like, if the lockdown had anything to do with them trying to get into the school or, like what exactly was happening. And I knew, like, they weren't allowed in the school at all. So, like, we had to get, like, let out to see our parents. And, like, this is, like, kind of the moment that, like, broke me. I remember coming outside. I wasn't really looking at any of the other parents. All I saw was my mom there who came to pick me up. And, like, one of the things that really stuck with me were just, like, how, it sounds corny, but, like, just how blue her eyes were, like, her irises just compared to the rest of her eye, which was just bloodshot red. I've never seen anyone look as broken as she did. And, like, thinking from her perspective, like, how do you tell your kid, like, what just happened in your elementary school, that 20 kids were just murdered? And I remember, like, I think she just outright said it, like, 20 kids were shot and killed. And I instantly, like, completely broke down. Like, I had no idea what was going on. I kept trying to, like, think it was some, like, sick joke that I would hate my parents for. And I couldn't even process what was going on. But I remember looking around, and all of the parents there were just crying, screaming, like, trying to get their kids out. And I remember we got in the car, and she took me to go see my dad at his office. And my dad's a pediatrician, so I'm not entirely sure on this, but I'm pretty sure that some of the kids that were there that got killed were his patients. I do remember him telling me that he, like, held a lot of them when they were, like, newborns and stuff like that. But I remember we were driving through the town, and just everyone I saw was just, like, broken, crying, like, literally, like, holding on to each other to keep themselves up. And it's just, I feel like when people hear about things like this, they don't really see or think about what that actually looks like in the community.
Yeah.
And I remember when we got there, like, there were adults or parents or something that were in the office that were coming up to me like literally like crying and telling me like, you don't deserve this, you don't deserve this. And I couldn't even fathom just any of it.
Yeah. At that point in time, do you remember when you first found out like the extent of what happened? Like, was it that night? I assume that, or like, yeah. When did you first find out? Because it was most of the kids were in a single classroom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, are you saying like when I found out like the details of everything?
Yeah.
I guess?
Yeah. And I don't want to hear if you don't know details, you can go look them up on your own. That doesn't matter. But when did you?
Like, I'm gonna be honest. Like, I know like people talk about like how you like block out trauma memories and stuff, but like I really don't remember anything from like the 2 weeks after that happened. Like, so I think like after I was at my dad's office, I don't remember anything after that.
That was actually going to be my next question, because I think you said it best. Well, this hits home for me because last week there was I think it was early last week or late the week before, there was a killing at a Sweet 16 party in a town down in Mississippi, I think. And what I remember so vividly was the next day, photos of crowds of people who were just hugging each other. There were just hundreds of people that came together hugging each other, right? And there's not much more you can do than that. And what I thought was, first, we talk about, when we see the headlines, we talk about the number of people who died, and oftentimes the number of people who are wounded. But wounded means wounded by a bullet or something, not wounded by trauma and everything that goes along with that. And so my next question to you was going to be about trauma. Like, what do you know about trauma? What do you know about this? That, like, when you hear about these, mass killings and so on, which are pretty much every day in the United States at some level. What do you know that other people don't know? Like, what do you see?
I would say like with this kind of thing specifically, like for one thing, I want to just like get this out of the way. Like, I would rather be close to an event like this than have someone like in my family die, like my mom or my dad. But I think it is a very unique kind of trauma that a lot of people don't really think about, and that when it first happened, for one thing, like there's just the fact that it's unfathomably like wrong and perverted, like that kind of thing, and trying to like be, once you're close to that kind of evil, I guess, one aspect is just trying to reconcile that inside of your mind. Like, it's not like you just lost someone. It's like something like truly evil has happened that's desecrated your childhood.
Forever, right? You went to the school that now doesn't exist. Like in that year, I think you were telling me the other day, like kids all year for a while were allowed to, in the middle of class in your school, just get up and leave when they needed to, and you must have had a lot of therapists in the school and stuff. Like, tell us about that. Like, what?
Yeah, so I remember in some of the weeks afterwards, once we went back to school, like I don't even remember how long we actually took off before we went back. Mm-hmm. But when we did, I just remember there was this one time where a kid just broke down crying and started screaming out in the hallway, and I just remember watching a chain reaction of the entire class just starting to cry. And like that kind of chain reaction, like that didn't happen one time. That happened multiple times throughout that. And I remember one of the times just looking at the teacher, and they were almost just like spacing out, and it was like, I can't even imagine like not only having to cope with that, but having to like manage a classroom of kids that has been completely traumatized by that.
Man. And multiply that by so many times across, this country and the world, right? But when I think about Marie Lucy, you know, and I showed the picture of the police with the guns and the little kids, and I think, wow, the trauma, man. Like, this is the thing that she tells me all the time. The amount of trauma that these kids go through every day because of deep poverty, because of violence, losing their parents, you know, and you know that, like, you see that.
And actually, there's one more thing that's like kind of an interesting aspect of it, and it's that like when you lose someone close to you, you don't get reminded about it every single day generally. Like usually you'll probably think about it every day, but having to like see that every day, like every time there's like a mass shooting, there's no way to get away from it. Like you can like you'll see it in your ads on your phone, front page of news stories. I remember at like the Uvalde one, there were some really, really graphic headlines about like, there was like one student that like covered herself in her friend's blood to like act dead. And like, that is not something that you really want to see. Like you can turn off your ads, you cannot use the internet or social media. You're still going to see it on the TVs around campus, or if you like look a YouTube video up on the computers, like you'll get an ad for like, even like the Sandy Hook Promise saying like, 11 years ago today, or like 9 years ago today, like a man walked into my child's school with a gun, like stuff like that. And I remember after Uvalde happened, the distinct feeling of like, wow, this is annoying. Like the fact that like someone can do something so horrible and the only really reaction you get is that it's just annoying is like almost unthinkable, I feel like.
Yeah. So these are some of the things that you see that many of us, and I'm sure there's a few people in this room who really relate to you for one reason or another, right? But that you see that we don't see, right? Like I see, the moment I see a shooting, I just see the trauma that goes out in concentric circles, right? It's not just this one family, or it's concentric circles, and the pain and the heartache, and so there's a way in which, you know, you and the millions upon millions and millions of people walking in your shoes are part of, you know, like an invisible tribe, right? And I'm gonna put a quote up in a second, but you just have this connection, right? When you drive by an elementary school, I mean, you must just see the sign, elementary school, and you, I mean, you know, there are just so many. I mean, in some ways, we have to just sit with it, you know. How has this affected the way you conceptualize God and the afterlife? I mean, I know you're a scientist, right? So how has this affected the way you think about people and humans and,
So I think in terms of God, like after it happened, like that was one of the things that I would think a lot about. And I kind of like came up with a sort of like understanding that I think like since then has definitely loosened a bit. But back then, like I remember coming up with this idea that there's like three possibilities for God. One is that he doesn't exist. One was that he exists and he's like powerless to stop things like that. And the other one was that like he just doesn't care. He's just indifferent about humans.
Yeah, he's indifferent or evil, right?
Yeah.
Even. I mean, it could be a fourth one. God's actually evil. Yeah, like think about that, right? Like these are the conclusions you get to, right? And if anybody had seen, if any of us could just take us there to see that classroom, I'm sure we'd all go to those four options pretty quickly. We at least have to entertain them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, like, while I didn't actually see any of it happen,
Yeah.
like, throughout that time, like, that was the one thing on my mind for months, was just visualizing it over and over and over again, like, in graphic detail from everyone's perspective, including the kids, the teachers, the shooters, and just everything.
Yeah.